celebrates the Feast of the Chair of St. Peter. This feast commemorates Christ choosing Peter to sit in his place as the servant and authority of the whole church. We are celebrating the unity we have together as we are in communion with our Holy Father, the Vicar of Christ. Matthew 16, verses 18 to 19, the Lord said to Peter, "You are Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church. To you I will give the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven." Jesus entrusted specific authority to Peter. The power of the keys designates authority to govern the house of God, which is the church. Jesus confirmed this after his resurrection when he said to Peter, "Feed my sheep." The power to bind and loose represents the authority to absolve sins, to pronounce doctrinal adjustments, and to make disciplinary decisions in the church. Jesus gave the authority to the church through the ministry of the apostles, particularly the ministry of Peter, the only one to whom he gave the keys of the kingdom. The chair, also known as the cathedra in Latin, and in Greek it means seat, is a symbol of the teaching authority of the bishop. And this is where we get the word cathedral, which is the church that serves as the seat of the bishop. The chair of St. Peter symbolizes the special mission of Peter and his successors. The feast of the chair of St. Peter began around the 4th century. The cathedra in Rome, which can be found in St. Peter's Basilica, was created in circa 1647 to 1653 by the renowned Italian Baroque artist Gian Lorenzo Bernini. You have heard about the Bernini columns in the Basilica of St. Peter. It sits on the altar of the Holy Spirit. There is a stained glass window above the chair with rays of light and the image of a dove at the center, symbolizing the Holy Spirit. The rays are divided into 12 sections, one for each of the apostles. The church has maintained the fact that she has been sustained, as the prophet Zechariah declared in Zechariah chapter 4, verse 6, "Not by might, nor by power, but by my Spirit." Pope John Paul II said, and I quote, "February 22nd, the liturgical feast of the chair of St. Peter is an important feast day for our church because it sheds light on the special ministry of strengthening and guarding the church in the unity of the faith which the Lord entrusted to the head of the apostles. It is an indispensable mission that is not built on human prerogatives, but on Christ himself, the cornerstone of the ecclesial community. Now, I'm going to share with you, when Rick and I got married, we were not where we are in our faith, where we are now in our faith. But we got married on February 22nd. And you can just imagine our bliss when we found out that February 22nd is the feast of the chair of St. Peter. So it's a very special date also because when we lived in the Middle East, the Bishop of Arabia, who was from Florence, Italy, also served his installation anniversary as bishop on February 22nd. So when we were there, he made it a point to make his pastoral visit to Yemen, where we were, on the date, so we always celebrated our anniversaries together. And because of this bishop, it was through him that we were blessed to go and meet Pope John Paul II. It was his anniversary present to Rick and me, to have to go to Rome and sit down and meet Pope John Paul II. Thank you.
All right, I'm just going to talk into this thing. The yellow handout that's being passed out is the outline for my talk, and then the other ones are just supplemental information, because I'm going to be talking about the gifts of the Holy Spirit that we receive in baptism and confirmation. And like when I went through RCIA, they didn't really bother explaining what they were. They just gave us the names of the gifts. And so one of the handouts, the one in blue, is actually written by a pope about, insight into the different gifts. And before I start talking, we're doing a program, we've never done it before, it's called Discovering Christ. And it's designed for people who are seeking. They don't have any faith, or maybe they don't, maybe they know about Jesus, but they don't know much about him. And so it's going to start next Monday. And so I brought some of these little cards that we had printed up. So if you know anyone, your family, friends, neighbors, or a place you can leave them, like your doctor's office, I brought some with me. So if you want to take some with you, because that starts. Camila got her glasses.
No.
No, you didn't?
No, these are...
I gave them to the receptionist. She said she would give them to you. Okay, sorry. Okay, all right. Because you weren't there when I went by there. Okay. So now we're going to talk about baptism and confirmation. So how many of you know what are the 3 sacraments of initiation are? You have to receive these 3 sacraments in order to be fully initiated into the Catholic Church. Can anybody name all 3? Anybody have any idea? Because I already named 2 of them.
Baptism, confirmation, first communion, and penance.
Well, it's really baptism, confirmation, and Eucharist. Those are the 3 sacraments of initiation. And so for people who are born into the Catholic family in the West, They will usually be baptized as an infant or a very small child. They'll usually make their first communion around age 7, and then they will get confirmed. The age of confirmation will vary, which I'll go into later. And it differs in the Eastern Rite Catholic churches, which we talked about before in other lessons, where actually infants receive all 3. So they get all the sacraments of initiation at birth whenever they're baptized. So that's just a different practice in the East, and I'll talk about that more later. It's kind of high. And one thing that makes these sacraments unique is that they can't be repeated. They leave an indelible mark on the soul, and that's why, like if there's a question about if somebody's been baptized, either baptized at all or baptized validly, they'll receive what's called conditional baptism, and that just means that it's it's done the same way, but the wording is a little different, just to convey that this is only being done in the event that this person hasn't been validly baptized before, because you can't repeat the sacrament because it's not necessary. And this became a question in the early church because under the persecution with the Romans, there were a lot of Christians who apostatized, and so they renounced the faith. So then a lot of them were repentant, they were sorry for what they had done, and they wanted to come back. And so there were some people that took a real hardline position and was like, no, you can't come back, you denied Christ. And then there were others that said, yeah, maybe we'll just let them get baptized again. But then they worked it out. Was it St. Cyril of Jerusalem? I can't remember which one it was. One of the early church fathers, he kind of chose a middle ground, and he said, well, let them come back, they've got to do some penance, but they don't need to be baptized again. And that was even a position of St. Augustine. And so they were not required, you'll never be required to be rebaptized. And if your original baptism, no matter what faith you came from, if it was a valid baptism, the Catholic Church accepts it. So the only time you won't get rebaptized, they just might do a conditional baptism if there's some question about whether your baptism was valid or if it ever occurred. So does that make sense? And so it's the same thing with confirmation. And the character remains even if you turn your back on it. So if you grow up and you renounce the Catholic faith, and actually this happened about a month ago, our sacramental secretary received a letter in the mail, and it was a woman's confirmation certificate and baptismal certificate and first communion certificate, and she wrote a letter saying she was renouncing her Catholic faith. And she didn't say why, and she's like, what do I do with this? And I said, well, you need to give that to Father Christopher, because that's something that has to be kicked up to the archdiocese. I guess they make a record of it. I don't really know what happens. But Deacon Bill was saying, yeah, that's what we needed to do. So again, but that again doesn't matter. Even though she's renounced her Catholic faith, she still has her mark of baptism and her mark of confirmation. Even if you die in a state of mortal sin and you go to hell, those marks will still remain on your soul. It doesn't change. Now, the baptism and confirmation come with the note of a seal. And Deacon Bill's talked about this before, where grace builds on nature. The grace of God does not squash or nullify our human or natural nature. It actually builds on it. And that's why all these sacramental signs that we have take natural substances and they give them a supernatural meaning, because they actually convey the life of God to us. So the notion of a seal, if you look in the Old Testament, circumcision was the way you entered the Old Covenant, the Mosaic Covenant. And so that was permanent, because if you remove the foreskin, it doesn't grow back. So that's a permanent seal, a sign of belonging to the Lord. And St. Cyril said that the way the Lord would know his own. Also, Roman soldiers were marked when they entered the army. I don't know if it was a tattoo. I think it was a tattoo or something like that. And again, that showed that they belonged to the Roman army. And it was like a seal that they belonged there. And then in Revelation 7, verses 2 through 4, then I saw another angel ascend from the rising of the sun with the seal of the living God. And he called with a loud voice to the 4 angels who had been given power to harm earth and sea, saying, do not harm the earth or the sea or the trees, till we have sealed the servants of God, of our God, upon their foreheads. And I heard the number of the sealed, 144,000 sealed, out of every tribe of the sons of Israel. And the 144,000 is a symbolic number because Revelation is apocalyptic literature, which is full of symbolic images. So that's not literal, that's symbolic. So basically, baptism and confirmation are two of the three sacraments of Christian initiation. These are the ones we're going to talk about tonight. Now, this question came up to me a couple of years ago when I was teaching someone one-on-one in RCIA, because he'd come in kind of late, was, well, what happens if I die, like I'm in RCIA and I die before the Easter Vigil and I don't get baptized, do I go to hell? And I was like, no. So the church has always recognized God has set up the sacraments as the normative means of giving grace, but he's not bound by the sacraments. He's God. He can save people any way he wants. And so he understands our circumstances. He foresees them. So in the early church, typically, they didn't call it RCIA, but it was RCIA, and it lasted usually 3 years. And during the time of persecution, it wasn't very uncommon for people in RCIA, which it wasn't called that, but they would be martyred sometimes, or they would just die a natural death before they made it to the Easter Vigil to be baptized. And so the church recognizes that if you're here, it's because you want to be baptized eventually. You're here because you have faith in Jesus, you believe in the Catholic Church, and so that's what the church calls a baptism of desire. And so God recognizes that, because that is a work of his Holy Spirit. You wouldn't be here if the Holy Spirit weren't